We're the first generation to feel the impact of climate change and the last generation that can do something about it.
We are in the beginning of a mass extinction, and all you can talk about is money.
There's been a big push in terms of focusing in on how investors might be able to put their money behind environmental or social impact goals here.
Lots to work on, but if we get it right, it will have a huge and positive impact.
Here we go, Sveinung. It is the first episode. It is the inaugural episode of Adventures in Sustainable Business, the podcast series. And since my name is Lars Jakob Tynes Pedersen, you must be Sveinung Jørgensen.
Absolutely, and we are happy to be here. And the reason why we're here, Lars Jakob, is because we've received so many questions from our international readers of the book Restart. We already have a podcast in Norwegian called Bærekraftseventyr. Try to pronounce that after me. Bærekraftseventyr. No, you don't have to do that. But and also you don't have to learn Norwegian to follow us on this podcast as you had to do just until now. And again, we've received so many questions from international students, our international audience out there, and readers asking us to please make a podcast in English. So here we are on New Adventures, now in English.
That's right. So the name of the podcast is Adventures in Sustainable Business. We are Jørgensen and Pedersen, and we call ourselves sustainability adventurers, Sveinung. That's how we've built our career, but really in our day jobs, both of us are academics. We are associate professors affiliated with the Norwegian School of Economics, NHH, in Bergen, Norway, where the two of us together are the leaders of the Center for Sustainable Business, which is a research center at the business school. And that means that we, in part, approach this topic from an academic point of view, but this is not an academic podcast. This is a podcast about sustainable business. And in our work, we've been working now for the better part of 2 decades, you and I, together, in very close collaboration with companies, both here in Norway and abroad, companies that are trying to become more sustainable while remaining as profitable as they have been, or preferably becoming even more profitable. And that has led us into a number of adventures in all sorts of industries where we sometimes work in close collaboration with companies in our role as researchers, where we conduct research on how companies try to build business models that are sustainable and profitable. Sometimes we end up working with these companies in different capacities. Both you and I are board members of both large and small companies that are trying to achieve the same goal of becoming sustainable and profitable. Sometimes we serve as strategic advisors to firms that try to do this. And now recently we've even been part of co-founding some companies that are trying to build business models that achieve this double purpose. And that's what we refer to when we say adventures. So the adventures that this podcast series is about are these attempts by companies, big and small, old and young, incumbents and startups, profits and not-for-profits, social entrepreneurs, all kinds of companies, all kinds of organizations that are trying to achieve at least 2 goals at the same time, both sustainability and profitability.
You mentioned almost 20 years, though, Jakob. We finished our masters back then and started our PhDs, and we started out asking questions because we loved our master's education. We're what we call it, business economists, right? That's what we do. That's our basic training in a way. And then we started on this journey to become doctors of philosophy, PhDs in business, and we started asking questions. And there was something that we loved at one hand, but there were some problems at the other hand about the way that we had learned business, and also the way we saw that business was practiced, and that kind of sparked the energy or how to say it in those 2 PhDs, and we started then questioning current business and how we could do business in a different way. And I remember the first time we met was in a course in circular economics.
That's right. And this was far up north, somewhere close to the Arctic Circle. We met at a business school where, at the time, what is now known as the circular economy it was called circulation economics. It was a focus on the flows of resources, the flows of materials in the economy, and how we could move from a linear economy where we take resources, make things, and dispose of them, thereby emptying the planet of natural resources and creating ever larger amounts of waste. And this esoteric PhD course that we were part of at the time, it felt new, it felt different, it felt a little bit strange. And it's interesting now, 20 years later or 15 years later, to look back and think about how many of those sort of movements in a more circular direction that are shaping companies are all around us, whether we're talking about Renault and their production of cars, where they use components from the cars of yesterday, whether we're talking about digital technologies that make it possible to consume products like your record collection or your old DVD collection. All of that stuff is, of course, now digitized, and you consume it through an app that streams it right to your phone or your smart television or what have you. So all of these business models that we look at today and think of as, a sort of normal part of our everyday lives. If you go back 20 years, those circular business models, service-based business models, even regenerative business models, they had yet started to materialize, at least in the vast numbers that we're seeing today. So in these 2 decades, Sveinung, so much has happened to business. So much has happened with regard to the importance given to sustainability, the expectations that customers, regulators, and other stakeholders have to companies in their efforts to promote sustainability and to deliver on sustainability. And so much has happened in the integration of sustainability into business models, into strategies, not as a sort of side cart on the motorcycle, sort of on the side of core business, but integrated into how companies actually develop their strategies, design their business models, and carry out their operations.
And it's been an adventure, Lars Jakob, from that first course and the first questions that we started to ask about business and how to run business and how to create and design more sustainable business models. We started empirically down in the basements. We started asking companies about this, asking people working in companies, what do you do? Why do you do it? And so on. And it was quite dark at that time, 15 to 20 years ago. The people working then with sustainability, they were not sitting on the motorcycle. They were absolutely sitting in that sidecar. And maybe they had a title working with communications or something like that. And they were responsible for the corporate social responsibility of these companies. And they didn't have the reports as they had today, and they didn't have the expectations as today. We had a lot of knowledge. As a couple of Norwegians going back to 1987, as we often do in Norway, reflecting on Gro Harlem Brundtland and the UN report on a sustainable future, where they kind of defined sustainability after decades of trying to get that on the international agenda. And then in 1987, something started, right? So 1987, time ticking until we started our journey down still in those basements. Because even though we knew about sustainability, people were aware of environmental issues, social issues, economic issues. At the same time, this was not integrated into the core of the big and large corporations. And one might say that, well, that's not the case today either. It's a long way to go before we can say that companies are truly sustainable and profitable. But we see more and more examples, and we see from different perspectives, empirically, when we gather information and data from companies, doing interviews and that kind of work. And also through the MBA programs, our own MBA program that we run on sustainable business strategy. meeting people, sitting in boards, working in different ways. We're now kind of taking the elevator from the dark basements and up to the boardroom, and now it's up there, and the companies know that the regulations are changing, the climate is changing, the expectations from customers are changing, also employees, the expectation of employees and other stakeholders, they are changing. So they need to also find ways of integrating sustainability into the core of the business, and this is difficult, and that requires what we call business model innovation, sustainable business model innovation, and perhaps also it requires a restart of many companies.
And in this podcast series, innovation is going to be um, a song that we will sing recurringly. We're going to talk a whole lot about business models. We're going to talk a whole lot about how sustainability is a part of business model design. It's a consequence of business model design, but it can also be a driver of new business models. And the book Restart that you've referred to a couple of times is our most recent attempt at writing down some of our work and some of our perspectives on business model innovation for sustainability. I remember when we wrote our first book, it felt like we didn't have a lot of empirical material to work on. That book was called Responsible and Profitable, and it was published sometime in the early 2010s. The book Restart was published first in Norwegian and then internationally on the Paul Grave Macmillan publishing house in 2017, 18, something along those lines. It was published open access, and at that time, it was easier to find these business models that could illustrate the kinds of developments that we're talking about and that this podcast series is about. And that book, since its publication, and I think it was the summer of 2018, since then it's been downloaded more than 600,000 times. And for me, that is more than anything an indication of the number of people, of individuals, professionals, and the number of organizations that are sitting out there trying to dream up the business models of the future. They're trying to grapple with the question of how sustainability, for better or for worse, because sustainability for some might look more like a threat, for others it looks more like an opportunity. But they're trying to grapple with the question of how sustainability is going to shape their business models going forward. What are the best parts of those business models that can be kept as they are or developed further? What are the parts of the business model that needs to be completely changed? So what constitutes that kind of restart? And yesterday, Sveinung, you and I were speaking to the owner of a large corporation, so one of the main stakeholders of a large corporation in Scandinavia, that is invested into many different industries, that has been part of this corporation's business for many decades. And they were now asking themselves the question in the boardrooms of the sort of mother company in this corporation, which of these business areas that we are operating in are going to survive, and which of them will be so threatened by regulatory changes, by the EU taxonomy for sustainable finance, by the expectations from investors, and so on, that we might want to divest from them. And if anything has been really shaping, I would say, the last 5 years of the field of sustainable business, it's how quickly and strongly and powerfully the field of finance has been, changing the ball game, I would almost say, by the big institutional investors that divest from whether it's CO2 heavy or other kinds of brown industries, whether it's smaller private equity investors or other kinds of investment firms that try to find the green ventures that will become the big players of the future. The way that sustainable finance has been shaping sustainable business is one of the really exciting developments of our time, and I'm sure that we will have many episodes digging into exactly that part of the equation, whether it is the nature and characteristics of the EU taxonomy for sustainable finance and what and how that matters for firms, whether it's the practices of sustainable investing, positive and negative screening, using ESG factors, the role of sustainability reporting. I mean, there are so many things in that landscape that are going on now that are really changing the game for companies big and small.
I think during these years, there have been many students who have taken our master course in sustainable business models at NHH over time. In the thousands now, over 7 or 8 years, I've been taking that course and receiving those mails afterwards. You guys really opened up a new way of thinking for us, and I never expected that I was going to work with the sustainability, but now I work with it in the large corporation, or I'm a consultant, or I work with it in different roles, and I'm also working on how we could combine the new technologies with the green innovations, and I'm really thankful for that. I mean, those kinds of mails, and also from people who have read the book and say, "Wow, this restart, this rethinking of what business is, what it can be." Not with all the solutions. I mean, we have still more questions, I guess, than we have answers to all of these questions. But we are getting more and more answers, and we're not alone. I mean, there are several academics now and practitioners who work diligently with sustainable business model innovation, trying to figure out, trying to get the concepts, trying to get the models and the theories that could kind of back up and support what to do and why, how to do it, and so what. Just as you mentioned, when you get those finance guys and into this, starting to talk about the ESG and materiality, really trying to identify what are the important major material issues in each sector, in each business, how to handle them, why handle them, how to communicate it, why to communicate it, to whom and when. I mean, it's been bubbling up from the start. I mean, these 2 decades that we started out with, and I'm so happy, Lars Jakob, that we now have this platform, this adventures platform in English, and I've written down and some of the questions that we have received during the last couple of years from our readers around the world. And I mean, also one thing is waking up with the emails from the students that they kind of say, okay, you guys, I hadn't thought about economics in that way or business in that way, and I see there's so many opportunities here, and also I see that companies have such a great responsibility for doing things differently. But then also waking up with a question from a reader in India asking, okay, you guys, really interesting this part about recycling, but is it the same as upcycling, and how can we kind of, is it possible to differentiate between up and downcycling and so on? And if we are going to turn the company that I work in into a more circular business, or have us to get a circular business model, do we need then to upcycle, or is it good enough to recycle or to repair and so on? I mean, that's just one example of a question and a theme that I'm looking forward to trying to answer in a future episode.
Absolutely, and we've received other challenges from both our students and from other readers. There was a student of ours who was an exchange student from HEC business school in Paris. He was very explicitly asking us to make an English version of this podcast, and he said, some of the questions he wanted us to address: how can digital technologies promote sustainability? What is the relationship between digital transition and the green transition? What is the regenerative economy? Is it the same as the circular economy? Is it sort of circular economy 2.0? And what is it going to mean for business? Is it going to be profitable? Is it going to change how we think about business? The EU taxonomy is a topic also that many of our readers are very interested in. And one thing is the implications of the EU taxonomy for the finance industry and for sort of financial decision making, broadly speaking, whether that's investing or lending or what have you. But how will the EU taxonomy be a driver for business model innovation? How is it going to change the business models of firms? And these are the kinds of questions that we've received and that we already have stacked up as episodes in the coming weeks and the coming months. But we should mention, Sveinung, that we are very, very happy to receive emails from our listeners, and we've set up an email address, adventures@jurgensenpedersen.no, and that is a mouthful if you're not a Norwegian speaker. It is our two last names, Jørgensen and Petersen, just in one word, and .no for Norway. So adventures at jorgensenpetersen.no. We're going to put that email address in the episode notes so you can find it and not trust my pronunciation of that email address. But we would welcome your emails with suggestions for episode themes, specific questions that you'd like us to address, or just general musings and reflections on the topic of sustainable business. Because I know this podcast series is going to go where it takes us. It's going to address the questions that we wake up thinking about, the questions that we receive from listeners, and so on and so on. And one thing we should mention, because I said earlier, we're academics in our day job, but we have so many other roles in business, whether as board members, as strategic advisors, as co-founders of startups, and so on. And that means that both from a topic point of view or a thematic point of view, but also from the point of view of how the episodes will look. Sometimes we're going to delve into cases. Other times, of course, we're going to talk about our research. And I think we should perhaps mention, at least in passing, the kinds of research we do, because we are, like we mentioned in the beginning, the co-leaders of the Center for Sustainable Business. And in the tagline of that research center, I think it says something along the lines of, we do research on the technologies, business models, and behaviors that promote sustainable business. And that is a relatively broad palette, but it's at least a starting point for the kind of research we do. And that's research in close collaboration with companies.
I think you could repeat that tagline, Lars Jakob, and give us some examples on each of those three.
I'm going to do it properly this time and read it in the way that it's written. The Center for Sustainable Business does research, teaching, and outreach on the behaviors, business models, and technologies that promote sustainable business. And we have many research projects going on in close collaboration with both large and small companies. And some of it is more oriented to the business model side. So we do business model experiments together with companies. We recently published a paper together with our PhD student, Hasnain Bashir, on refill models in the consumer goods industry. So we were looking at what might be different business models that can allow refill of products like soap and shampoo and what have you in the consumer goods industry, so that you can reduce the reliance on single-use packaging. So that's an example of a research study that we've done recently and that I'm sure we'll address in a future episode. We also do more sort of behaviorally oriented research in close collaboration with our colleagues in consumer behavior and marketing. So, for instance, we are currently doing research on the wine industry, on wines that are on so-called climate smart packaging. That's a research project in collaboration with the Norwegian wine monopoly, one of the biggest buyers of wine in Europe. And then we're looking at what are the consumer behaviors, what are the barriers that consumers perceive when it comes to drinking wine on these sort of thin plastic bottles as opposed to heavy glass bottles, for instance. Are there barriers that the sellers of wine need to overcome in order to convince wine drinkers that it's perfectly fine to buy your Bordeaux or your Amarone wines on plastic bottles, for instance? So that's another example. And then we have so now we've talked about business models and we've talked about behaviors, and we also do research on the technologies that promote sustainable business. And we currently have research projects on, for instance, the use of sensor technologies to identify waste streams and resource streams, both in the waste management systems of cities and municipalities, but also in the business landscape. So basically, can you, for instance, track all the resources that go into a shopping mall, through the shopping mall, and out of the shopping mall, so that you can minimize the generation of residual waste and maximize the sorting and recycling of resources that can be used again. So these three concepts, Sveinung, behaviors, business models, and technologies. All of those three are important for the research that we do and also the cases that we are going to address in this podcast series.
I think we should say a couple of words also about this term adventures, because we talked about different kinds of adventures here. Adventures, our own adventures as academics, and also now in startups, trying to do this in practice. We talked about, and we will talk more about the companies and the people who are working there and their adventures, because they have to move into unknown territory. I mean, it was easier to do business before, right? It was easier before we had the knowledge about the sustainability issues that needs to be solved, and it was easier before the new regulations, the new technology, the new expectations from different kinds of stakeholders. I mean, it was misunderstand me right. I mean, if you can say that in English, misunderstand me correctly, perhaps. I'm not saying that it was that easy before, but today, I mean, there are other circumstances today that requires that managers, owners are more adventurous, and that's another part of our mission. I would say the things that we do together with companies, shoulders down, be open about where you stand now, what kind of problems are you a part of, but also what kind of problems are you solving today, and then moving from that. That's why we work with innovation and sustainable business model innovation. How can you, for instance, become more circular? How can you address issues in the value chain concerning ethical issues for people working there? How can you address these different kinds of problems that you're creating, but also how can you solve more problems than you create, right? And this requires adventurous companies. It requires adventurous politicians. It requires adventurous stakeholders all around the table, so to speak, and that they also want to go out and try to find identify the problems, finding ways of handling them, integrating it. I'm trying again, integrating it into the core strategy of the business, and also developing and redesigning the business models of the company. And we have a hero, Lars Jakob, and we've had a hero for all of these years. And not last night, but yesterday, I was in my son's class. He's 17 years old at a high school here in Lillehammer in Norway, and I told him that this Uncle Traveling Matt from Fraggle Rock was our hero and is our hero. And I mean, you should see the faces of the audience sitting there, because I was that. Yes, I didn't get the attention that I was expecting, but people in our generation, I mean, we're getting old, Lars Jakob. Not that old. My name is Svein Ung, which in English means, or in Norwegian means young boy, but I'm not that young anymore. But anyhow, this Uncle Traveling Matt has been a hero of ours, and is a hero of ours, and he's a true adventurer. And he, if you guys remember, he escaped from Fraggle Rock, and he went out into the world and tried to figure out how this world really worked.
That's right. And for our younger listeners, I would urge you to, if you don't know Uncle Traveling Matt, go to YouTube and Google Fraggle Rock, and you'll probably find some old clips from this wonderful kids television show from back in the day. And like Sveinung said, we not only were we inspired by this Uncle Traveling Matt, who went out into the world, and the only thing he had to do, sort of in return for his constituents home in Fraggle Rock, was to send them postcards and tell them about the kinds of things he experienced. And he asked questions, not always great questions. Once he tried to run in a sort of competition with fast food to see if fast food was really as fast as it claimed, and it turned out it wasn't. But they ran, and he won. But he asked questions. Sometimes the questions were better, and I think that's also true for the way we have worked, Sveinung, and we have built our career because of our liberal employers at the business school. We have been allowed to build our career in a sort of Uncle Traveling Matt kind of fashion. We've been allowed to travel out there, knock on the doors of companies, invite ourselves in, and eventually also even become invited in to the offices of executives, board members, and so on, and to understand what they are trying to do, what their problems are, what their strategies are for solving them, what their business models used to look like, what they look like now, the kinds of changes that they're trying to make in order to make their business models fit for the future. And when we say sustainability adventures, those are the kinds of adventures that we are doing. And sometimes we send postcards in the form of podcast episodes. So I guess every episode in this series will be a postcard of its own. Sometimes we send them in the form of scientific papers where we study the behaviors, business models, and technologies that promote sustainable business. Sometimes we write them in the form of books like the open access book Restart that you can access for free on paulgrave.com. Sometimes we write them in the form of newspaper chronicles and so on. The point is, we are on an everlasting adventure. And the nice thing, Sveinung, about being a sustainability adventurer, in addition to the fact that it's really fun and inspiring, is that it's a title that is completely unprotected. So anyone can become a sustainability adventurer. So part of the sort of reason for this podcast coming into existence is also to invite all of you to become sustainability adventurers together with us, and that's our hope for this series as well.
As you said, Lars Jakob, our listeners can join this conversation by reaching out on the email that you mentioned.
You want to try the email?
No, not at all. Or I can try. You said it was adventures at jorgensenpedersen.no. No is the Norwegian suffix. I guess that's the right term. For you listeners out there, you are welcome to join this adventure and become a part of it. And also you can join the conversation with us on either Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, or Instagram. So in addition to the email that you mentioned earlier, Lars Jakob, it's also then possible to join the dialogue on social media.
So I guess there's no further ado, Sveinung. We've introduced the series. We've tried to give you a little bit of a flavor of what this podcast series is going to be about, what kinds of questions you can expect us to address, what kinds of themes, how we are going to approach it in terms of research orientation, in terms of business orientation, in terms of the cases that we're going to tell you about. And who knows, Sveinung, where we are 20, 30, 40 episodes from now. I'm looking forward to this adventure together with you and together with all of our listeners.
You have listened to Adventures in Sustainable Business with Jørgensen and Pedersen.
Visit us at jorgensenpedersen.no, where you can find more information about this podcast and other information about our work. And if you like the podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review.